Now, let's imagine that you were here at Haas reunion 2 years ago. You might have been sitting on a similar lecture where the topic was about something like digital transformation. Now, at that point, digital transformation might have still felt like something that's to come, something still far away, something where we have a little bit of time. But it's been just over a year since the COVID era started. And if one thing's become clear, it's that organizations have no choice but to change in this rapidly changing world. But the truth is, organizations can't change if its leaders can't change with them. So that brings us to today's session, all about developing a changemaker mindset. Here's our agenda for today. I've got an hour. Here's the 5 things that I'd like to do. We'll kick it off by talking about, well, what is a change maker? And of course, the question of, can I become one? We'll discuss the change maker mindset, which is how you can begin to see the world like a change maker. I'll share 3 mini case studies of inspiring change makers across different fields, different sectors, and we'll pull out some lessons that you can use on leading change. We'll have a section on how you can go from idea to action, about how you can actually make change happen from where you are. And then, of course, students always will have a question, answer, and discussion. Okay, so that's the plan. That's where we're headed alongside. Of course, this is your reunion weekend. And so we'll have at least 2 breakout rooms, a chance for you to meet with one another and connect. Learning goals for today, 3 things. I hope that you'll understand how to think and act like a change maker, that you'll get some inspiration and some tools for how you can lead change really from wherever you are. Looking at these locations, I love to see we've got Tokyo, Bethesda, San Francisco, Davis, and also then how you can develop new approaches for turning ideas into action. When you have an idea for change, how do you actually make that a reality? Okay, so that's the goal. That's where we're headed. But let's start with the fundamental question. Question maybe some of you are even asking yourselves right now, which is, what is a change maker? So no right or wrong answers, but would you put into the chat when you hear the word change maker? How would you define it? What does a change maker mean to you? No right or wrong answer. Could be a full sentence, could be just a couple of thoughts. Progression from Jen. What else? What else comes to mind when you hear the word change maker? Inspiring others, transformation, from idea to action from Amy. Yep. It's maybe a new word for some people. Question status quo, yet a fundamental underpinning of being a change maker is that catalyst. Anyone who pushes for change they think is important, regardless of position or authority, creating a new future, a visionary. I love this. Yeah, you're really painting this nice holistic picture of what we mean by a change maker. Now, just to anchor our session today, let me go ahead and define how I think about change making. And it's a very simple definition. Changemaker leads positive change from where they are. That's the simple definition. That's what we'll use to work off of. So if that's the definition, now I'd love to hear from you. When you hear the word changemaker, when you see that definition, who comes to mind for you? Would you put into the chat a person that comes to mind? It could be someone famous, a household name, or maybe it's someone not so famous. Maybe it's a boss or a direct report, or maybe it's a family member. Who comes to mind for you as a changemaker? When you see that definition, who's a changemaker that you might know? Who is a changemaker? Obama, Greta Thunberg. Yeah, I take case of Greta in one of my classes. Absolutely. Other changemakers. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, moms. Yep. Several classmates from Jen. I love to see that. Yeah, glad to see that Haasis are changemakers. I agree. Elon Musk. That's probably the most common response that I get. I think often it's Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and sometimes Jack Ma. Those are kind of the top 3 changemakers. Shonda Rhimes. Yeah, what I love about this is you're starting to see that people come in all different sectors, all different roles. Some famous, some not. And here are 2 of my fundamental beliefs. I take a radically inclusive approach to change making. So I have a belief that everyone can be a change maker. And that it's all about having the right mindset and the right leadership. We have so many titles in the world that inherently divide us right now. So either you're an entrepreneur or you're not. You're a technologist or you're not. A leader or you're not. But change making, at least as I think about it, is an inclusive definition where anyone and everyone can be a change maker. The key, of course, is the right mindset and the right leadership skills. Okay, so having set the stage now about what we mean by change maker, who is a change maker, let's go into talking about mindset. So, in a world that's rapidly developing before our eyes, how can we learn to navigate, shape, and lead positive change, both for yourselves as well as for others, people on your team, and help others gain the certainty to lead amidst so much uncertainty? Now, as any of my students will tell you, and I'm thrilled to see at least a couple alumni of my MBA class here, I'm obsessed with mindset. So, why mindset? Four reasons. The first is that each of us have incredible power over our mindset. It's something that's practicable, it's learnable, it's achievable by anyone. Now, it's a process, not a destination. Think of it like going to the gym. You don't just become fit with one workout, right? It's a continual process. The same with a changemaker mindset. You never go, okay, I'm done. I've got my changemaker mindset. It's something we continually work on. But also, it's a virtuous cycle for work and for life. With executives that I've worked with, we find that the more they work on their changemaker mindset at the office, it also helps them as parents and partners and so on. It's a virtuous cycle both inside and outside of the office. Now, again, just to ground us, what do we mean by mindset? The exact definition here is the established set of attitudes held by someone. This is the Google usage graph over time. You can see it's basically non-existent until about 1990 or so. And that's when a brilliant researcher, Carol Dweck, at some other university in Palo Alto, came up with a book called Mindset. And so she developed this idea of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So we see at that point, it's really started to take off, but still in a very academic sense. So as we think about transitioning from Dweck's more broad mindset to what I call a changemaker mindset, we can actually draw some inspiration from a very inspiring changemaker of 2021. This is, of course, Amanda Gorman. She gave her brilliant poem, The Hill We Climb, at the Biden-Harris inauguration. And I loved her final three lines of the poem. She says, "For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." What I want to do here is really key on those last two, see it and be it. To me, this is really about what it means to be a change maker, to be able to see opportunities for change, even and especially when things are hard, to say, hey, there's still an opportunity that things could be better. That I see an avenue for positive change. But it's not enough to just see it, right? As Gorman says, are we brave enough to be it? And that will anchor our talk today. How do you recognize opportunities for change? Then also, how do you take action on them? See it and be it. Okay, so now let's talk about leading change from within. Especially here in Silicon Valley, I think we tend to overglorify the lone entrepreneur. And of course, someone mentioned Elon Musk, sometimes Zuckerberg, Jobs, etc. And to be sure, there's an important role for change makers who are those sort of visionary entrepreneurs. But again, my approach is much more inclusive. And so I want to focus on three inspiring change makers who have led change from within. I don't think that any of these are household names. I doubt that you will have heard of them, but I hope that you'll be inspired by the change that they've led. And each of them, I'll tell you their story, tell you a little bit about how they led change, then also we'll pull out some key insights for you as change makers. As I present these, I welcome you to keep reflecting on how might I apply these lessons to my own work and my own life. Then after we share these three stories, you'll have a chance to connect in breakout rooms and actually apply it to your own life and your own work and think about how might I take this forward. Okay, so the first change maker I want to introduce you to is Julie Kluger, formerly of UC San Francisco. Now, UC San Francisco, let's say, is one of the best medical centers in the world. They quite literally saved my dad's life when he was there for cancer treatment. That said, they found that dosing errors, so when nurses are doling out medications, they account for 34% preventable adverse drug events in the hospital. So in other words, these are wonderful nurses. This is no critique on the nurses themselves, but there are way too many dosage errors. When you think about someone getting these crucial medications, a mistake could be truly harmful or even deadly. So Julie set out to say, okay, how might we figure out how to reduce this error rate in medications? So she came in with a broad mindset, trying to look at the picture from the big picture. And what she found is that it wasn't that nurses weren't well trained. It wasn't that nurses didn't know how to use the equipment to dose out medication. It's that they constantly got interrupted, that they would start dosing out medications, but there was a norm in the hospital which said that for sure doctors and even other nurses could basically interrupt another nurse whenever they wanted to. And that meant to that they never had their full focus on doing something so important. Imagine for yourself, if you're trying to focus on a task, but maybe your kids or a colleague keeps interrupting you, it's so hard to focus. So she came up with a simple, elegant, but important intervention. She had nurses begin to wear these vests which say, do not interrupt, or sometimes do not interrupt dosing out medications. This created a visual reminder to people that, okay, this nurse is focused on doling out medications. You cannot interrupt them. Now, to be sure, there was some pushback, but the data speak for themselves. There's an 88% drop in medication errors over 36 months at 9 different Bay Area hospitals. She started at UCSF and then scaled it throughout. So Julie innovated from within UC San Francisco and saved a ton of lives as a result, all with a pretty simple intervention. The key insight here for all of you is that sometimes the most powerful changes actually come from a simple insight and a simple intervention. Sometimes we tend to overglorify change or think it has to be this huge, complex, long change initiative when maybe it's actually just a very simple culture shift. Now, that said, Julie, what she did, it may seem simple, but it doesn't mean that it was easy. What she did is a really nice embodiment of one of my favorite changemaker mindset concepts, which is something called norm entrepreneurship. So, norm entrepreneurship is normally used for any of you that have studied political science in undergrad. It's normally used in the context of international relations. So, we often talk about a nation state being a norm entrepreneur. So and so country was a norm entrepreneur around climate change at the Paris conference, etc. But Cass Sunstein basically took this concept from IR and applied it to business and organizational culture in a paper called Social Norms and Social Rules. What he said is that just like anyone can be a business entrepreneur, someone that launches and scales a business or an organization, so too can you become a norm entrepreneur, just someone who creates or scales a sense of culture. Now, what I love about this is that it's inherently democratic. Anyone can become a norm entrepreneur, no matter where in the organization they are, all the way from intern to CEO. You can help to influence culture. Now, norm entrepreneurship can be both formal as well as informal. So, on the formal side, maybe you're pushing for a formal policy, let's say equal pay between men and women and across different races. Or maybe it's something more informal. Maybe it's saying, hey, these are really tough times. We're spending so much time on Zoom. We're all exhausted. Before we start the Zoom meeting, why don't we just each take 1 minute to check in and say, hey, how are we doing? Now, just like a business entrepreneur, there's no guarantee that your business will succeed. Same with norm entrepreneurship. There's no guarantee that others will pick up on this culture that you're starting, but you can at least start it and no one can tell you not to. The key insight here for change makers is that you can catalyze change through culture, no matter where you might be in an organization. It's inherently democratic to start and lead culture through this concept of norm entrepreneurship. Okay, our second change maker. This is Sam McCracken. He's a member of the Sioux tribe in northeastern Montana. And he's also a project manager at Nike. About 10 years ago, he made a pitch which would change the trajectory of his life and his work, and also that of Nike and also of his community. He proposed a business development strategy which targeted the Native American and indigenous communities with the goal of improving health and wellness through promoting and encouraging physical activity. He pitched and then developed the Nike Air Native N7 shoe, the N7 retail collection, and also the related N7 fund. The idea is that it created these special shoes, special clothing, and then the proceeds of which would go to support this N7 fund. The fund, which of course was directly supported by these sales, helps to create access to sport for Native American and Indigenous youth in the US and in Canada. And to date, the fund has raised about $5 million and helped about 500,000 children. Inspiring. So when it comes to a key insight for changemakers, 2 insights here. Our own lived experience can inspire the changes that we seek to create. What Sam was able to do, he was able to connect his own experience growing up, part of the Sioux tribe, and also his experience and expertise at Nike. He was then able to innovate at the edges to find ways he could bring these 2 worlds together for a net win-win in multiple different ways. He found connections from both parts of his life and brought them together. Now, as you think about the big challenges ahead of us, so from things like climate change to racial justice to water access, I would argue that it's unlikely that any one single discipline, any single sector, even any single company will solve each of these by itself. What Sam does that's so inspiring is if he thinks at the edges, he looks at where one traditional approach ends, where another traditional approach ends, and finds ways to fuse them together. Sam's also a great embodiment of something called the T-shaped leader or T-shaped person. This is a concept originally developed by IDEO, which is the design firm based in the Bay Area. And it's a simple but powerful way of thinking about the way you show up in the world. So the T, think about yourself being T-shaped. At the top of the T, this is your breadth of understanding. This is sort of a wide variety of interests and curiosity and skills. But then that leg of the T going down, that's your depth of skill. So when IDEO is looking to hire someone, let's say a CFO, of course you need someone who knows their finance, someone who did probably much better than I would have done in the finance classes at Haas. You need to make sure you actually know your finance. That's the depth of skill. But then also they want people with a breadth of understanding, people who are curious and know a little bit about a lot of different things. In the case of Sam McCracken, his depth was in business development and project management. He was very solid there. But also he had curiosity, community, connection, and this ability to paint a picture for others to follow, which was his breadth. It's because he was T-shaped, he was able to make both a deep impact and also have that big scale. Now, if you are inspired by Sam, you're thinking, well, I want to make some type of positive change, but you're not sure where, let me point you towards these. My colleague at Haas, Robert Strand, the head of the Center for Responsible Business, he's a big promoter of these. These are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 goals that are broad and inspiring and are a chance for us to make positive impact towards the world. Now, if you're thinking, hey, I want to create some change from within my company, but I'm not sure where to start, this might be a great place to get just a bit of inspiration. You see everything from reducing hunger to quality education to gender equality to decent work and economic growth to climate action. Out of curiosity, when you see these 17, is there one that you feel most compelled to work towards? Will you please share in the chat? If so, no right or wrong answers. We need people solving all 17 of these. When you see this, is there one or maybe two that most inspire you? I'd love to see if there's any patterns among our group today. Which one inspires you the most? Got number 12, responsible consumption and production, no poverty, from Doug. Allison's currently working on number 3. Love it. Yeah, good health and well-being. 13 and 14 from Raul, climate action, life below water. Yeah, you'll see that some of these actually tie together really nicely. Jada Brady, 1 and 2. And if you think about the idea of innovating at the edges, sometimes there's opportunities to even bring these together, right? So we think about climate action and also maybe reducing inequalities. Those actually go together quite well. Sarah, gender equality and climate action. Yeah, absolutely. There's a gender lens on this as well. So hopefully this can be inspirational to you and great if you kind of don't know where to get started. This might be a place to say, okay, let me take a look at these and think how my company, my organization could better embody these. All right, our third and final case study, and then you'll do a breakout session, is Jason Levine. He's the new Chief Marketing Officer of Sabra. For any hummus fans out there, Sabra is a hummus company. So back in his life before becoming a hummus changemaker, Jason worked at Nabisco. He was in charge of brands, iconic brands like Oreos and Wheat Thins. But he decided to take a job at Sabra for a couple of reasons. One, he wanted to help people lead a healthier plant-based diet. Secondly, he just loves hummus, says it's a family favorite. And also, he wanted a chance to sort of shake things up. He was in a big company where he could make some change, but he wanted the chance to really lead change as the chief marketing officer. And he was quite creative, absolutely a question the status quo type of guy when it came to marketing hummus. What he said in an interview is that hummus needs some pizzazz, some excitement, some sexiness. And that's really what he did. He created World Peas, which, World Peas, a pop-up restaurant in New York where they did different international cuisine takes on hummus. They had Korean, Thai, American soul, Mexican, Nigerian, Caribbean blend hummus. They did a Super Bowl ad where they specifically brought in a wide variety of personalities, celebrities to appeal to everyone from Gen Z to baby boomers, including T-Pain as well as Real Housewives. He took an approach to inclusive marketing. And what Huffington Post article said about Levine and his work is that Sabra led a cultural movement rather than a traditional ad campaign. So you see that, for instance, hummus is now available at like gas station rest stops as a snack. So they're really pushing the envelope on this thing that used to be just a dip to now trying to make it something much more, all because he's willing to really question the status quo. A couple of key insights for you about Levine's story. The first is that you should take time to identify and cultivate your sense of purpose, and then lean into that purpose to stay motivated when leading change gets hard. Now, maybe you already have your sense of purpose. Maybe it will be with those sustainable development goals. Or maybe you're managing a big team. How can you support that sense of purpose among your direct reports? Well, a couple of examples we can take from the tech world here. So many of you probably know about the 20% time project at Google. The idea was that coders would spend 80% of their time on their sort of written job, and then 20% just hacking on anything that was interesting to them. At the time, this was early on, Paul Budak was a product manager, and he developed what became Gmail. So 20% time just giving him the freedom to hack and to create led to Gmail, something that we probably all use today. Atlassian, the Australian-based tech company, they have something called Ship It Day, where the only rule is you get the chance to build whatever you want with anyone on the team in service of creating better products for Atlassian. So if you are leading a team, you want to help people find their purpose. Can you give them that space to go out there and to create? One more favorite study to share with you before we do a breakout is a reminder that purpose is a superpower. So again, back to the medical world, this is based on research by Yehonatan Turner, a doctor in New York. So he's a radiologist and noticed that a lot of times radiologists make, again, too many mistakes. Not that they're bad or not trained to their job, but they make a lot of mistakes. You just imagine their job looking at x-ray after x-ray after x-ray. So he came up with an intervention. He said, what about if instead of just showing the x-ray, just showing the broken rib or the broken wrist, what about if we also show a picture of the person, the smiling face behind that broken rib, that broken wrist? And what he found is that when radiologists saw both the x-ray as well as the person's face, it led to two things: longer, more detailed reports, and also a decreased error rate. Again, this isn't that radiologists are not good at their job, but rather they get into it to fundamentally help people. But you get distracted from that as you get just looking at x-ray after x-ray after x-ray. But instead, he found that by getting a sense of purpose, this idea you see the face you're actually helping, this led to help people feel more connected to the impact of their work. So you can find ways to bring that sense of purpose back to inspire your change. Okay, so with that, let's do a breakout room. This is a chance for you to apply the things we've talked about so far. The question for you, anchored by the words of Gorman: see the change, be the change. So which of these Changemaker mindset tools and approaches might you use to identify and lead positive change from where you are? And a reminder, some of the concepts we've talked about, we've got norm entrepreneurship, we've got finding opportunities at the edges like Sam McCracken, we've got becoming T-shaped, sustainable development goals, reconnecting with purpose. So Danelle will put you into breakout rooms for about 7 minutes or so to discuss. I encourage you to introduce yourselves, connect with one another, meet your fellow alumni, and to discuss how you can take these concepts that we've talked about here about a changemaker mindset and apply it to your own work in your own life. All right, breakout rooms are coming up. Have a great time. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Always a good sign when you want to keep talking and keep talking and keep talking. So sorry to interrupt you, but now let's talk about moving from idea into action. So we've talked about how to see the change. Now let's talk about how to be the change. I'll share a few favorite ideas on going from idea to action. So first, we have the knowing doing gap. This is based on an article and a book by Jeffrey Pfeffer and Robert Sutton. They're again from that school across town, but we get our revenge because they actually published this in the California Management Review. And in it, they talk about how the gap between knowing and doing is bigger and more important than the gap between ignorance and knowing. So in other words, it's actually harder to go from what stops change is not so much knowing what to do, it's actually knowing how to make that change happen. So a question for all of you: even when you know what to do, what stops you from actually taking action and doing it? So you know what to do, let's say in your company, in your organization. What stops you from actually doing it? Would you share into the chat? What stops you from taking action? Jen says tired, yeah, fatigue. Certainly, especially now, big deal. Leading change can be really tiring. Time from Sarah, yep. Tired also. Time, yeah, too many constraints on your time, too many demands to find that time to actually go and innovate. to change things. Very common challenges for sure. Pushback from senior leaders. Norvell, yeah, thanks for that. Keep reflecting for yourself. Give yourself permission from Paul. Yeah. Keep reflecting what holds you back. Now I'll share what Sutton and Pfeffer found. The first is that performance secrets just fundamentally don't matter. Right? So we talk a lot about Southwest Airlines, and there's so many case studies written about them. Maybe you even did one when you're at Haas about how they became the low-cost leading airline. And all these airlines have tried to copy them. But you know the game plan. They've been written in the case study. You know what to do. Other companies just can't copy them. And that's because Pfeffer and Sutton say knowledge management often focuses on facts instead of philosophy or values. They focus especially here on fear. So maybe Norvell, this is what you're getting at, or maybe even Paul, like giving yourself permission, but sort of this fear of actually taking action. The key insights here is that it's all about culture, it's about leadership, it's about individual initiative, and that our collective mindset matters. If you're managing a team, how can you make it safe for others to actually take chances, to feel like I can actually go across that knowing and doing gap? Now, as I work with all kinds of executives, I find that they are faced with so many potential risks, so many decisions to make. And it's not that any one or two of them is especially stressful. It's just the mere scale of all of the decisions they have to make. So here's a simple but a powerful tool that I use, which can be quite helpful to help you think about, is this a risk worth taking? So put simply, the risk quotient is potential reward quantified over potential loss. Let's try it out in a couple of examples. So we think about one example. Let's say running a red light. So you're driving and there's a red light and you decide to plow through. What's the potential reward? When you put into the chat qualitatively, what's the potential reward from running a red light? What would you benefit from by doing so? Potential rewards. Getting there faster? Yep. What else? Maybe this is a sign that you're a bit more mature than my undergrads that I teach. Oftentimes, there's one or two undergrads that will say the sense of thrill, right? So there is a sense of thrill perhaps from running through a red light. I'm glad no one mentioned that. If we think about the potential loss, again, qualitatively, we're looking at a ticket, we're looking at an accident, maybe injury, maybe even death. So we try to quantify it. We would say, potential reward probably pretty low, a one or a two, potential loss probably being pretty high. Right? This is kind of an extreme example of saying, hey, this is probably a risk that's not worth taking. Now let's put it into a business context. This is Jean Guo, an amazing, indefatigable entrepreneur that I'm on the board of her organization based in Paris. She's a tech entrepreneur and they work on digital skills training. So she had basically worked up a pretty good organization that was sustainable, doing a good job in France. They started getting all of this demand from all over the world from people that wanted to work with her company, her organization. They would provide some funding, but ultimately it was a short-term partnership. And so we were working together to say, hey, Alex, is it worth the risk? So we worked together and we worked on the risk quotient to basically figure out, well, what's the potential reward, right? So she's very driven and she wants to make sure her purpose gets magnified. So she really wanted to scale beyond just France. But she's also really concerned about scaling too quickly. That if she hired a bunch of people, that perhaps the partnerships wouldn't hold and she'd have to end up firing them, that maybe she'd scale beyond what she was ready for, that she'd bring on all these new challenges. So we quantified it. We quantified and found that the potential reward was greater than the potential loss. Now, again, it was still a calculated risk. It was still a risky thing that she decided to do. But this simple tool helped her figure out, okay, it's worth these partnerships. It's worth hiring a few more people and going for it. Instead of just going with your gut, it's a way of quantifying and getting a better sense, perhaps a better feeling for going over that knowing doing gap. We can also pull some inspiration from thinking like a scientist. So, sorry, academics love really long journal titles. So this one is called A Scientific Approach to Entrepreneurial Decision Making, Evidence from a Randomized Controlled Trial. Ooh, okay, that's a lot. But basically, here's what the study was at its core by a bunch of Italian economists. They worked with startups that were based in an incubator, and they had a control group and an experimental group. The control group was just things as normal, just do the regular incubator. But then for the experimental group, they essentially taught these entrepreneurs the scientific method. They learned how to apply hypothesis testing to their startups. And they compared the results of those who had learned hypothesis testing and those who had not. And what they found is that those trained in the scientific method were more likely to make more pivots, some more shifts in strategy, and also generated much higher, more than 2x higher average revenues. So, what are the key insights here? The key insights here is that you can lean into your curiosity. You can run experiments and let the data take the sting out of failure. No scientist sits in a lab and is mad at themselves because their data failed, right? You just go in with a hypothesis and say, I wonder what would happen if. And by doing so, it takes the sting out of failure and allows you to run more and better tests. The more you can test, the more hypotheses you can try, the more likely you are to pivot and therefore find revenue. Next, and then we'll do a quick breakout room again, is firing bullets, then cannonballs. This comes from research done by Jim Collins and Warren Hansen in their book Great at Work. It's a study of high stakes managerial decision making. So often when we see that there is what looks like one big audacious bet, we think that's all that it was, when really it's actually the sum of lots of small tests. Think here of Apple and the iPhone. When Steve Jobs was standing up on stage in Moscone Center and pulled that iPhone out of his pocket, people thought, wow, that's a big bet. But no, actually, it was a sum of lots and lots of small tests. They began with the iPod and testing, hey, would people be interested in carrying around this device about phone size, which played a bunch of music? Next test, iTunes. People would be willing to actually pay money for music. Yes. Then they started innovating, going from the iPod Big to the iPod Nano and saying, oh, is this something that people would start to carry from there? So the lesson here is that we often think we need to go big with our change, shooting that one cannonball. But actually, what we want to do first is fire a bunch of bullets, right? So we fire small little tests, a bunch of things until we get our aim right. And once we feel like, okay, we sort of hit the mark on these smaller tests, then we can go big with our cannonball. That's the iPhone up on stage, which is really done because they had the confidence for doing lots and lots of small tests. Go big by first doing lots and lots of small tests. Okay, so those are a few ideas on going from idea to action. I'd love to give you a chance now to discuss back into your breakout rooms these idea to action insights. So I'd love to hear in your groups, which of these are you most excited to bring to your own Changemaker work? And also, how might you apply it in your context, right? So thinking about this idea of thinking like a scientist, I gave you this context for entrepreneurial startups. How might it apply for you at Genentech or wherever you might work? Again, the concepts we discussed, the knowing doing gap, what holds us back from that gap, the risk quotient, ways of quantifying risk, thinking like a scientist, and also firing bullets, then cannonballs. All right, I have about 5 minutes in this breakout room, so a little bit less time, chance for you to apply and think about how you can not just see the change, but how you can be the change. All right, breakout rooms are opening up. Have a great time. Here's the Haas courtyard. Perhaps like you, it makes me a bit wistful, but we'll be back in person hopefully soon. And I hope that you are enjoying this chance to connect virtually, at least. All right, so as we wrap up, for students always, time for some questions. Let me leave you with one final piece of advice, a challenge for you, and that is to go fail. So I teach at Haas, where I teach such high achieving people just like you, where they achieve so much and yet are often so scared of failing. And at its core, being a change maker means you have to develop a new relationship with failure. For my students, I give them what's now become known as the failure exercise, and sometimes known as the failure professor, which I hope is because of this exercise, not because of my other failures. But the idea here is that after learning about a change maker mindset, I give them the challenge to go out, go to the Haas courtyard. You have to go ask for something, and you have to purposely get rejected. As you can imagine, their responses are somatic. They start turning red, they start sweating, but then they go out, they ask for things, and they realize, okay, actually failure isn't quite as bad as it seems. Sometimes students even get what they want. It was raining one day and a student asked, hey, I don't have an umbrella. Would you walk me all the way across campus? And the student said, sure. One student walked into the gym and said, hey, it's not my birthday. Will you get everyone to sing happy birthday to me? And they did. So sometimes we realize that we need to put ourselves out there and risk failure. But also sometimes we realize that failure just isn't fatal. So as a change maker, can you find the courage to go out and to fail? That's the challenge that I leave with you. If you're going to see the change, you're going to be the change. Can you find the courage to also occasionally fail? As we wrap up, I would love to hear from you. What are your top insights from today's session? Or put another way, what concept or concepts are you most excited to try out for yourself? Would you share it into the chat? I'd love to hear from you what your key takeaways are. And then we'll get into a few minutes of questions and answers. Nothing risked, nothing gained. Yeah, taking smart risks. I believe all of us as change makers should take more smart risks. Generally, the T-shaped model, so breadth of interest and deep expertise. What else I got with you? So with your mindset, stay connected to your purpose. Yeah, just like the hummus changemaker, Jason Levine, and like the radiologist example taught us. Purpose is a superpower. I love that, Cindy. Nicely framed. It really is. Fire bullets and cannonballs from Elise. Yep. You don't have to go big to get started to change the world. Yes, that's something that people get so sort of frozen in fear with, is thinking they have to do something huge. But actually, like as the 17th Sustainable Development Goals show us, it's not any one of us that's going to solve, let's say, access to clean water, but lots of us pursuing our own vision of change. Paul says, consider how to define success and allow for failure and learning. Yeah, that's a constant theme throughout many of the idea to action concepts, is to how can you get comfortable with failure, and also how can you learn from that failure. Great insights. Okay, at this point, let me first thank you all for being here. What a privilege, what an honor to be here for the first part of our alumni weekend. I'm really grateful for all of your insights, for all of your positive participation, and for all of your willingness to become a change maker. I really encourage you to stay in touch. There's nothing that I like more than supporting change makers. And as Haas alumni, I will always prioritize an email from you. Just put Haas alumni in the subject line, and I promise to get back to you, whether that's a question of change making or really anything else. My contact information is also there, which Danelle put into the chat. And so with that, let me say thank you so much. And also we have a few minutes. I would love to hear what questions you might have, questions about change making. Yeah, so Amy says, how to rally others to your idea. Great question. So oftentimes as change makers, we need to be able to paint a picture of the future for others to follow. So just a couple of ideas and things that I teach in my classes around sort of influence as a superpower. So one is leading with that vision, painting a picture that's so compelling that other people want to feel part of that vision. The second one is being clear on your why, but flexible on your how. So being really clear on, this is sort of where we want to go. This is the vision, this is sort of the concept out there, but then leaving it flexible enough for other people to feel like they actually feel ownership in it. Here we can take a great example from Rich Lyons and the work that he did with our defining leadership principles at Haas. Right? So he helped to sort of shape this vision. We're going to be the #1 defined by culture business school out there. But he was not too prescriptive in terms of saying, this is how it's going to take shape, other than he empowered people to be part of it. So the admissions team decided to start asking questions around the DLPs in their applications. People started putting the defined leadership principles on the back of their business cards. He was really good at painting this vision that people wanted to be part of, but also leaving enough space so that others could actually create and innovate in their own way. One final piece of advice is, sometimes as change makers, we are more willing to take risks. We feel more comfortable with being out there. And others, especially in a bigger bureaucracy, might not. And so a challenge for you is, can you make it safe for others to follow you? Something that I'll often do trying to lead change at Berkeley is to say, hey, would you come with me on this thing? It's a chance. We're taking a risk here. But I promise that if things work, I will make sure you get the benefits. I'll make sure that you get noted for your contributions. But if it fails, I will take that blame. Can I make it safe for others, especially those who may not feel quite as confident taking those risks, to come along with you? So thanks, Amy, for that. That's a great question and a really important one, I think, for a lot of change makers. Yeah, flexible on how, not too prescriptive. Exactly. So you're giving space for others to sort of think about how we can innovate within it. Yeah, thanks for that. Well, if other questions come up, you're welcome to reach out. There's my email. Also, LinkedIn is a great way to connect.